One of the themes throughout the Old Testament is that of godly people who followed God with their whole hearts, but were in turn followed by children who did not. Whether we're talking about David or Solomon or Gideon or even Samuel, there are a number of characters in the Bible who loved God. They served him, but when they died, their children did not. And in matter of fact, everything that the parents had built up in one generation, many times, the children undid. And that's what I want to look at today. Hello, this is Nate Swain, a pastor of Bristol Springs Free Church, and this will hopefully be one of a multi-part series looking through the book of Judges. My purpose is to keep these relatively short and simple, but I would like to go through Judges and give you an overview of the book so you can have an understanding of what goes on in the book, because I've learned a lot just reading through it and studying it lately, things that I don't think I'd ever heard until recently. But also, I think there's a lot of things that we can apply to our lives on a daily basis. And something today that I think is very relevant, something that I have looking forward ahead in my life, and many of you might be in that very process now. So the book of Judges opens with a kind of an interesting scene. And I kind of think of Judges as like the sequel to Joshua. If you ever watch a part 2 to a movie, I recently was watching parts 2 and 3 of Pirates of the Caribbean, and I watched part 4, actually. Some of you may not have seen it, but it opens with this epic, hilarious escape scene by Captain Jack Sparrow, and he's doing all his Jack Sparrow-y stuff. Judges has the same feeling when it opens. It literally says, after the death of Joshua, the people of Israel inquired of the Lord, who shall go up first for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? The Lord said, Judah shall go up. Behold, I have given the land into his hand. So the book of Judges, opens with the people of Israel going to war against their enemies, literally where it left off. It just picks up right at the beginning of an action scene. And so the first chapter basically covers the movements of the Israelites into the land, taking over the nations that they were facing against. And in fact, that is what happened shortly after Joshua died. But although that might feel like that's a good beginning, it's not entirely. It didn't last. I want to look at Joshua chapter 2, verses 6 and onward. When Joshua dismissed the people of Israel went each to his inheritance to take possession of the land. So Joshua gives his last rites, his final words, and he sends the people out, and they go to take the land. And the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great work that the Lord had done for Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun died at the age of 110 years old. So while Joshua was alive, and while the men who were with him were alive, the people who had seen God's work entering into the land, I've talked about that in one of the previous videos, the people followed him. But this is where it changes. Verse 10, and all that generation also were gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. The generation that had entered into the land of Canaan died, as they do. And the next generation was different. The next generation was not familiar with what had been done. Maybe they had been told, but it wasn't important to them. And notice their response. Verse 11, and the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. And they abandoned the Lord their God, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. Joshua and the people that were with him served God their entire lives, but when they died, there was nothing to keep the next generation. There was no reminder. There was nothing to hold the next generation to the Lord, and they forgot God and began to go after the gods around them. I think it's easy, first of all, when we think about that, how easy it is it when we immerse ourselves in things that will distract us from the Lord. I live in the United States, as many of you, all of you probably do, and I am surrounded by voices calling to me to look to all of these different things for my fulfillment and satisfaction. Some of them are good, some of them are not good. And it is very easy for me to forget who God is and what He has given me, the joy that He promises. And if I forget that, I will immediately start looking to these other things to fulfill me. And that's what we find. The beginning of Judges shows the people of Israel, the very next generation after they've entered in, they just had this incredible conquest. A bunch of slaves entered in to this land of Canaan and took it over. A bunch of nobodies beat this entire province and took it to be their own, and their children fall away and become the very people that they had driven out. It is amazing how quickly we can forget God and look at the things around us if we are not constantly reminding ourselves that it is He who gives us joy. It is He who gives us satisfaction and fulfillment. But there's more than that. I'm going to read Deuteronomy 6, verse 7. This is a command that Moses gave to the people. Let me go back to verse 4, actually. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. These words that I commanded you today shall be on your heart. Listen, verse 7. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as a frontlet between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So, does this mean that we need to write the Bible on the outside of the doors of our house? No. But it does mean that God's Word needs to be a part of our daily lives. And for those of you who are parents, hopefully that'll be some part of my life in the future. Teaching your children is one of the most important things that you can do, so that the next generation doesn't forget God. Somehow the people of Israel failed at being parents. The generation after the ones that entered into the land of Canaan did not teach their kids to honor God. And so the moment they passed away, the Israelites, as a nation as a whole, turned to following other gods. It's so easy. It's so easy. Our default is not to remain loyal to God. If we are not constantly pursuing Him and reminding ourselves of who He is. I see this in my life all the time. If I don't constantly run to Him and say, I need you to keep me close, I will drift and I will forget the joy that He promises. I will forget to stay close to Him. And parents, if you are not teaching your children, if you are not making discussion about God's Word, discussion about spiritual things a part of your daily lives, God is merciful and God is gracious and God works through our shortcomings. But even in that mercy, that may lead to the next generation not knowing Him. I think it's serious. The book of Judges opens on an epic note, an exciting note. God's people are charging into the land. They're defeating their enemies. But because they didn't teach themselves to follow Him, and because they didn't teach their children to follow Him, to remember what He had done for them, they fell away. And like I said in the previous video, this is going to lead to Judges being the darkest book, I would say, in the Bible. There's some horrible stuff that happens. The last verse in Judges says, in those days there was no king in the land, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. The ending of Judges comes to a point not of happiness, not of joy, not of things being made right, but rather it comes to a point and says there was no authority. People did what they thought was right. They did what they wanted to do. That is what happens if we do not constantly preach the gospel to ourselves, if we do not constantly remind ourselves that we are sinners, that we need to be made whole. If we do not constantly preach to ourselves that only satisfaction and joy can come from following Christ, then we will turn aside and we will become our own authority. And those of you who have children, if you do not do that for your kids, they're going to grow up, and they're going to have to decide for themselves who they want to follow. And there's a lot of really strong voices calling out to them. Those Baals around the Israelites seemed very attractive. There was stuff that they could look at, something that they could touch, tangibly see. And the people around them seemed powerful. And then in this world, there are things that are calling out to us that are tangible, that we can see, touch. And the people around us proclaim to be joyful and happy, to have the good life. And if we do not remind ourselves that joy and satisfaction can only come through God, and that He demands obedience from us, then we're going to be just like the Israelites. And we're going to pursue our own gods, and we're going to fall away. And it could be very quick that the next generation of Christians decide, you know what? I don't want to do this Christian thing. I'm going to do my own thing. And that could happen very quickly. So I hope that's as encouraging. I hope that's thought-provoking for you. Judges, we're going to be in for a ride. There's going to be some adventures, some tough stories. But it all began because after Joshua died, the people forgot God.